What is up, guys? Welcome back to day 4, game 5 of the Orillas de Mar International here in Tenerife. My name is Titus Tromavicius. I'm a Grandmaster, and I want to share my experiences and games with you today. Disclosure, I am recording this game one day later, so we just finished game 6, as I was too tired to do it after the game yesterday. And tomorrow's game will be available tomorrow in the morning. So going into round 5, I was on 3 out of 4 with a minor rating deficit, but I was on a 2-game winning streak, and I was building some momentum up. And in round 5, I had the white pieces again, and I was paired up against another women's grandmaster, Huang Qian from China. I can't remember the last time I played 2 WGMs in the same event. This might be the first time. And I was about a 100-point favorite going into the game, so with the white pieces, I definitely was looking to apply some pressure. So when I was preparing for the game, I noticed she was playing the Slav mostly in her most recent games, and I was basically deciding whether I should go for my patented exchange Slav. And I have maybe around 15 or so games played already in this position with varying results, but I have some new ideas ready in these lines, so I thought maybe I should try this. Or I should try what I eventually settled on was a knight f3, knight f6, g3 approach. And I was expecting her to play some bishop f5 line. I recently won a very important game in the national championship with this line. And I had some improvements ready if she were to repeat the exact same moves that were played in that game. So I was expecting bishop f5 in this position basically, but she thought for maybe a minute or two and then decided to continue the symmetry with g6. And I'm usually, again, not the biggest fan of playing these positions with the white pieces because I feel like they could lose their, they could simplify very quickly basically. And the positions can become pretty dull very fast, but sometimes you have to play what you don't like to, and my opponent insisted that we play the symmetrical Grunfeld, so here we are, and I just decided to play basically my main line, which was b3. I don't think this is necessarily the main move in this position. There's a lot of moves tried, but this is the move I usually go for, these setups with the if and shadow on b2. And my opponent doesn't really skip a beat and decides to take on c4 and play for c5 and immediately damage my structure because I can't really avoid getting these pawns anymore. The d4 pawn will disappear eventually and I will get this damaged structure, but I do have some pressure along the diagonal here and also have potentially an open b file for my rook in the future. So as far as I know, yeah, bishop b2, I was still in book. Queen b6 is considered to be a little bit more precise, as after queen b3, black has extra options that she can go for. But I decided to, again, stick with my main line, which is queen c1, c takes d4, knight takes d4. And again, this is where it started showing that my opponent doesn't really play this structure or these setups all that much, because she started thinking for a couple of minutes here already, signaling that she might be already out of book. And I did notice that she used to play a decent amount of King's Indian 5 to 10 years ago, but this is not a King's Indian, right? This is a completely different animal. This position is already quite open, so you don't really have that much time for the slow maneuvering that you usually have in the King's Indian. And after thinking for about 3-4 minutes, she decides to go for a knight fd7, which is already quite a big mistake. Basically, what this move allows me to do is trade the dark square bishops and relieve the tension that was forming on b2. So basically, black was applying pressure and keeping my position sort of constricted a little bit. But after the bishops come off the board, she no longer has the pressure that she once had, and she doesn't have enough time to also establish a satisfactory blockade on c5, because that was what she was going for. She was trying to establish a dark square blockade, but as we'll see in the game, that doesn't really work out for her all that well. So she goes with her plan pretty quickly. She follows up. I decided to start with queen e3. I think the queen is placed very well here. It puts pressure on c5. Immediately, it also prevents the opponent's queen from going to a6. Knight b6, knight c3, and now we also have ideas with knight d5. She prevents it with bishop e6, and now rook a b1. So basically, all of my pieces are very well placed, more or less perfectly placed, in trying to apply pressure against these misplaced pieces. Her entire queen side is under pressure as early as move 15 and 16, sorry, and black's position is already quite bad. So basically, again, yeah, like knight fd7 in this position just wasn't the right approach because this pressure favors black. And what she should have done was either go for bishop d7 with trying to play knight c6 next move, avoiding damaging her own structure, or play for knight c6, which is considered to be maybe slightly better for white, but nothing special. So back in the game, yeah, queen c7, knight e5. Again, the knight cannot be basically kicked out of this corner because the pawn is pinned. Rook a b8 tries to sort of salvage the pawn, and rook fc1 is just basically, bringing my last piece into the game. I was thinking maybe I should go for something a little bit more direct. I was even considering something as crazy as f4, just to eliminate the e5 square from the queen and basically make all of her pieces restricted. But I decided that this made more sense, and I potentially want to go for a knight d5 setup. And after she takes, recapture with the pawn and basically claim that even though these knights will be sort of protected, this knight will be completely offside. I can potentially pressure the pawn in e7 and reroute my knight maybe via c4 to, or not c4, sorry, maybe even via c6 after the pawn goes to b6 to apply more pressure on e7. And maybe knight b3, knight d4, knight b5 can also become an idea. So my opponent decides to sort of, I think she fought for maybe 20 minutes here and decides to try to activate some of her pieces. And here I started thinking for also quite a long time. I think I had maybe a half an hour edge on the clock here, and maybe it was like 20 minutes, and it completely evaporated after my move because I was considering basically three things. I was mostly trying to make bishop b7 work, but unfortunately, as far as I can remember, I really couldn't because of knight b7, and if knight c6, which was my move, trying to fork the queen and the rook. I believe I was considering queen d6 here as the only move, and after queen a6, black has knight c5. And the geometry just works out for black barely, but it does. And I couldn't really see any follow-up from this position because, yeah, my knight is hanging basically, and I can't take the rook without losing my queen. So there was a couple of other lines that I didn't really like with bishop b7, but that was the main one which made me reject it. And I also was considering rook b5. And during the game, I didn't play rook b5. I was kind of rejecting not playing rook b5, but then I went and checked at home with the computer, and bishop d7, which I saw, I thought, okay, rook b2, and now she cannot play bishop b6 because my rook is no longer hanging on b1, so knight b7 is much stronger now, as we'll see in the game. But she can play potentially just b6 and sort of eliminate the weakness and cover the c6 square for the 4 for the knight. And it's kind of still, obviously, white would be better, but now the knight is actually kicked out of its nice outpost, and the position becomes somewhat unclear. Definitely the manner of the game shifts from being completely in white's favor into being unclear. So knight b7, I think, was a prudent decision. Definitely not the only one. There were other good moves, but knight b7 is the most forcing, and if you see a good forcing move, you should probably go for it, as it clarifies the situation as well. And after bishop c4, knight e5, if my rook was on b2 in this position, which we could have gotten if rook b5, rook b2 in that line, then she wouldn't have rook b1. Basically, this would be hanging, and this would be hanging as well. So she would be losing material on the spot, but because my rook is on b1, she does have rook takes b1. And after capturing bishop e6 is the only move for the bishop. Knight c6, queen c7, knight b5, queen d7. So all my pieces are kind of activated, and again, it just showcases the problem with the two knights on a6 and c5. Like the c5 knight would be fine, but because the a6 pawn is stuck defending it, black's position is definitely close to being completely lost. And rook c1, I think, is just a prudent way to apply more pressure. Again, maybe not the only move. Maybe I could have played h4 immediately as well, because I'm not really threatening to take on c5 yet, because let's say, yeah, after she played rook e8, I can't really take on c5, because if I take knight c5, queen c5, and queen d1, I get back ranked mate, basically. Back ranked mated with bishop h3. So I'm not really threatening it yet, but just I'm keeping the knights at bay by, you know, constantly attacking them. And after rook e8, h4, now I am threatening on c5 to capture the knight, and black is basically powerless to do anything about it, because she can't really defend it due to the knight restricting the queen from b5. So she decides to go for bishop d5, and initially I thought that this was probably winning, but not an easy win, or not as easy as I would like it to be, which was a little bit, you know, kind of getting. I was annoyed by that a little bit during the game, but as it turned out, computer's obviously giving a massive edge regardless. And after her move, which is not the best one, the best move is probably queen takes c6, trying to eliminate as many pieces as possible, and then try to use the rook, potentially with the a pawn still, and try to harass me and my minor pieces. But she does decide to go for bishop a2, and after knight c3, bishop e6, knight a7. Again, not the only moves, but, you know, just safely collecting the pawn on e7. I have 2 knights for the rook, and the game should be more or less winning fairly easily. But at the same time, I did make a bit of a mess out of it. So let's see how the game proceeds. Here again, I couldn't find the exact way to break through. I think the computer liked knight b5, just to sort of, you know, look at d4. Potentially maybe look at c7 at some lines. I decided to go for knight e4, basically provoking f6 because I wanted to go to g5, and then just going back and claiming that I've weakened her structure a little bit more. At the same time, if black does get e5 at some point, this could be problematic to win, because my knights will not have any good sort of squares to play around. And black will have a decent amount of space to sort of establish, I wouldn't say a blockade, but some sort of a defensive setup. So king g7, knight d4. I felt like I should probably try to trade out the bishop now that the light squares are weakened and my bishop is stronger than it was a couple of moves ago. I think my opponent should have played rook c8 here, as it was the computer's top suggestion. I was considering to take on e6 and just play like queen d4, and claim that eventually, yeah, I'll bring my knight to maybe f4 and then try to attack the weakened squares on g6 and e6 with the knight. She decides to go for bishop f7, but bishop h3, again, not the only move. Immediately asks important questions. And after e6, which is another inaccuracy, knight cb5 finally comes in. And now there's a lot of weak squares here as well. And if the bishop falls, then black's position collapses, basically. She decides to go for bishop g8. I decide to force the matter with queen c7, queen to e7. And here I had a very simple win, which I missed. I'm sure most of you have spotted it already, which is knight d6, a little tactic that, you know, just wins an exchange and basically forces resignation. So again, it got a little bit sloppy there at the end, but bishop e6 is obviously still good enough, but it doesn't win material on the spot. And here also I had, I think, a better move than what I played. Let me think if it was, I think it was queen c6, if I'm not mistaken, is what I could have played. And that would have been also a bit more accurate, because after queen e6 I have knight d6, basically. And either I force a transition to a completely winning pawn endgame, or I end up piece up after, you know, king g7, let's say. So again, that was definitely more accurate. I decided to go with the simple route, which turned out to be not so simple after all. Usually the simplest win is the quickest win, but again, obviously the evaluation of the position doesn't change, and like white is completely winning. But I was getting a bit low on time, and I was sort of losing control here a little bit, you know, dancing with the knights aimlessly. And eventually my opponent did play g5, which kind of just, how to say, rushed the the ending, and after knight fe3, you know, like the knights come to f5, and eventually the two knights now have, you know, jobs that actually do something, right? And an outpost on f5 and d5. And then eventually after knight d5, you know, f6 or h5 are going to fall with the knight coming to f4 or the knight taking on f6. So a bit sloppy at the end there, but the evaluation never really shifted. White was winning basically from the start. Again, you know, if there's one point to point to in the game that my opponent decided to play something she doesn't really play, and then immediately after she played knight f7, her position became very difficult to navigate. And yeah, you should probably just stick to what you usually play and not experiment in structures that you're not familiar with. That's the lesson there. Hopefully, I take my own advice in the foreseeing next games. So I'm on 4 out of 5. I think I'm almost break even on rating. So we're basically back on track. The momentum is building. Yeah, and tomorrow's game will be in the morning tomorrow. Or sorry, today's game that I played already will be tomorrow in the morning. And I'll see you all then. Take care.